Hello. In this video, we'll be talking about discounted bonds. What are bonds? Bonds are a way for a company to raise money. They issue bonds, which means they sell bonds out in the public, and they can do this with increments of $1,000 or $5,000. And so that allows them to have many investors, and oftentimes this way they don't need to bank to get a loan, and they can raise money in this fashion, which is typically can be easier than getting a loan from the bank. So the issuing corporation, which is the corporation that's selling the bond, sells a bond out to the public, and they're obligated to repay two amounts. One is the stated amount, which is the face value of the bond at a specified maturity date sometime in the future, and some periodic interest payments that are stated on the bond. So bonds can be the stated amount, whether it's 1,000 or 5,000, can also be called the principal value, par value, face amount, maturity value. Those terms can all be interchangeable. And the periodic interest we're talking about here is the interest payment that is paid to the bondholder or the investor. And that could be called the stated rate, the coupon rate, or nominal rate. When a company issues a bond or they sell a bond, they record a liability because now they're going to owe money to the bondholder sometime in the future. So the company that issues the bond records a liability. The investor who buys the bond records that as an asset, as an investment. Let's look at an example. On January 1, 2027, Masterwear Industries issued $700,000 of 12% bonds. Let's just stop right there. $700,000 is the maturity value or the principal amount or face value, all meaning the same thing. This 12% is the stated rate on this bond. Means when you issue the bond, to figure out the interest payment, you're going to take your face value, 700,000, times your 12%, which will equal to $84,000. That's an annual amount of interest. It goes on further to tell us interest of $42,000 is payable semi-annually on June 30th and December 31st. Well, the $84,000 is an annual amount, so if we get paid twice a year, you have to split that in half. So there's a $42,000 interest payment that is going to be made on the 30th of June and December 31. The bonds mature in 3 years. Bonds usually have a longer maturity date, but just for purposes of this illustration, they made it short. The entire bond issue, so the sale of the bond, was sold at face amount. Face amount is the face value, maturity value. That means that the bond is sold for $700,000. And you might be asking yourself, well, of course a bond is $700,000. You just told me that was issued for $700,000. Well, we'll get into that as to why those numbers aren't necessarily the same. United Intergroup Inc., the sole investor in the bonds, planned to hold the bonds to their maturity. Let's look at the journal entries. Masterwear, which is the issuer, the seller, got cash for $700,000, a debit cash, and now they owe United Intergroup $700,000. So they're going to record a bonds payable liability for the face amount for $700,000. The bonds payable will always be recorded at the face amount or the principal amount, same thing. Additionally, United, which is the investor or the bond holder, now has an investment in Masterwear. So they debit investment in bonds at the face amount for $700,000, and they paid out cash, so they're going to credit cash $700,000. There's different terms that you will need to know when we're talking about bonds. The first is the stated rate, which we've already discussed. Stated rate is the rate that is stated on the bond. This will be for the interest payments. This will determine what the interest payments to you the bondholder or the investor is going to be every 6 months, typically is what bonds have it. The market rate is the rate that the bonds are being traded or sold for out in the open market. Okay, so if the stated rate is, the way you read this, if the stated rate is equal to the market rate, then the bond is sold at face value. If the stated rate is less than the market rate, then they're sold at a discount. If the stated rate is greater than the market rate, then they're sold at a premium. So what do these things mean? Let's look at a discount. Think about when you go, if you go to a store and there's a shirt and the price on the shirt, the price tag says $100. But you go up to the register and they say, oh, actually what you owe us for the shirt is $90. Well, you just got that shirt at a discount. You paid less for that shirt than what it was. We won't say what it was worth because maybe it is worth $90, but let's just for this example, we'll say the shirt is worth $100. You paid $90. You paid a discount for it. Now, let's just say the shirt, the tag says $100 and you go up to the cash register and they say, oh, now it's $110 and you decide to buy it just for the purposes of an example. Then you purchased the shirt at a premium. It got sold for more than the face amount, which means you as the buyer paid more than the face amount. And the discount means it gets sold for less than the face amount, and you as the buyer paid less for it. So how a stated interest rate, you're going to look at your stated interest rate right here. The way it compares to the market rate will determine if a bond is sold at the face value, a discount, or premium. And we're going to go through and see why that happens and how that happens. But a bond is issued, right? And you have to determine the bond price. Since we're talking about long-term liabilities, which means that they're due in longer than a year from now, the way to calculate the bond price is two pieces. The first piece is you have to take the present value of the principal payable at maturity. So you're going to take the present value of the principal or the face value or the maturity value. That's part one of the liability. And then you're going to add the present value of the periodic cash interest payments. So this is the interest that you as the bondholder will get every 6 months, assuming it's a semi-annual bond. And we've learned in previous chapters what present value is. It's under the time value of money chapter. If you're not familiar with present value, you must go back and review it, because the rest of this chapter is heavily reliant on understanding what the present value concept is. And there will be many times throughout the semester that will come back to the present value concept. So you will need to know what it is. You need to understand what it represents. And the present value rates that are used to calculate these two pieces, the present value of the principal and the present value of the interest payments, are going to be calculated using the market rate, not the interest rate, unless the market rate is equal to the interest rate. And again, so the interest payments are going to be calculated using the face amount or the principal amount, maturity value, all interchangeable terms, times the stated rate, not necessarily the market rate. You should also know the bond prices are typically stated in terms of a percentage of the face amount. So if a price quote of 98 means that a $1,000 bond will sell for $980, and a bond priced at 101 will sell for $1,010, because you're going to take In this situation, you're going to take 1,000 times 98%, which is how you get the 980, and the 101 is 1,000 times 101%, which is how you get the 1,010. I want to go and discuss this discount and premium because it's really, really important. It's going to come up throughout the entire chapter, and I want to make sure you really understand this stated rate versus the market rate. So with bonds are sold on the open market, and they're open and sold all day, every day. You know, the market's open, and that's what drives the market interest rate on the bond. The stated rate is the interest rate that the company that's issuing the bond is stating that they will pay to the bondholder, you know, for interest. Let's take an example. Let's just say I am Apple Computers, or Apple, I guess I should say, and I'm going to sell a $1,000 bond, okay, and at 10% for 3 years. It's a 3-year. Well, so on 1/1/X1, I will issue this bond, and it will be due on the maturity date will be 12/31/X3, I should say. So what happens is that you as a bondholder is going to pay Apple $1,000. You're going to be out $1,000 on January 1, but because it's $1,000 times 10% on 12/31/X1 and 12/31/X2 and 12/31/X3, Apple will pay you $100 of interest, right? And 12/31/X3, they're also going to pay you the $1,000 of the face value. So you're going to get $1,100 at the end of the 3rd year. When your stated rate is equal to your market rate, you're selling your bonds at par. Okay. Now let's take the same example, but the stated rate is equal to 10% still, but the market rate, what the bonds are trading on the market, is 12%. So what this says, if the market rate is higher than the stated rate, that means that me, as a as an investor, I can go out to the market and buy a $1,000 bond, and let's just say it's a 3-year bond paying interest annually, and I can get, if I give the company $1,000, I can get $120 per year in interest because it's going to be $1,000 times 12. But I go to Apple and I look at Apple, and they're selling their bonds and their stated rate is 10%, which means if I give them $1,000 today, I'm going to get $100 for the next 3 years for every year for interest, right? So that's $100 per year. And you're like, and I'm like, well, Apple, why am I going to give you $1,000 today if you're going to only pay me $100 per year, right? And then $1,000 back at the end of 3 years, when I can go out to the open market and get $120 per year of interest. I mean, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to give you $1,000 to get less interest than I could otherwise. So what Apple does, or what the issuing company does, is they'll say, okay, well, we'll still issue this 3-year bond, right? And here we're on 1/1/X1. And instead of giving us $1,000, you're actually going to give us $940 because we're going to sell it to you at a discount because we realize that the market rate is higher and you can get more interest if you go on the market. So the way that Apple is going to entice me to buy that bond is that they will give me a discount. So I give Apple $940 at the beginning of the on 1/1/X1, okay, and then they're going to pay me $100, which is the $1,000 times 10% for every single year, and then at the end of the year, the face value of that bond is $1,000. So they're going to still pay me $1,000 at the end of the 3 years. So now essentially what they've done, let me just quickly, let's just do a color change here. What they've done is I gave them $940 on the onset, and they're going to give me $1,000 at the end of it. So that means that I have purchased this bond at a discount. So when your stated rate is lower than your market rate, you're selling a bond at a discount. The opposite is true also when your stated rate is higher than your market rate, then you're going to issue your bond at a premium. That's going to be a different video. I just kind of wanted to point that whole logic out to you. Now let's go back to the slides. Go to my slideshow. It takes a while to load. So the discount, what we just went through, the discount is if the stated rate is less than the market rate, then it's going to be sold at a discount. Okay, so we went through these slides already. And now we're going to go to see what happens when a bond is sold at a discount. With the same facts, on January 1, 2027, Masterwear Industries issued $700,000 of 12% bonds dated January 1. So if it doesn't say stated rate, it just says 700,000 of 12% bonds, that means that the stated rate is the 12%. Okay, interest of 42,000 is payable semi-annually on June 30th and December 1. Again, that's going to be my face value times my stated rate times I'm going to pay it every 6 out of 12 months, which equals $42,000. So that's how you calculate the interest payment. The bond matures in 3 years. The market yield for bonds of similar risk and maturity is 14%. So this tells me this is the market rate. It says the market yield. United Intergroup Inc. purchased the entire bond issue, planning to hold the bonds until maturity. So let's calculate what were these bonds sold for. We know that the stated rate is less than the market rate, so that means it's sold at a discount. But how do we calculate that discount? How much is it sold for? This is the same facts up here, right here. Well, there's two portions. You have to calculate the selling price by adding two things. Number one is the present value of the interest payments. So we said we already calculated that the interest payments was going to be $42,000, right? Because they're paid semi-annually. But you have to take the present value of the interest payments is the first part of calculating the price of the bond. And these interest payments, unless they say otherwise, oh no, actually, I'm sorry. It says they're paid June 30th and December 31st. Our bond is January 1. So this is an ordinary annuity payment because it's paid at the end of the periods. You don't get a payment on interest payment on January 1, 2027. So you're going to look for the present value table with looking at n equals 6, and because there's 6 payments, because the bond is for 3 years and each interest payment is paid out twice a year. So you have 6 payments for this bond. And when you look up the present value, the interest rate you're going to use is going to be the market interest rate. Now, the market interest rate we're told is 14%, but that's an annual rate. So you have to divide that by 2 because we have 2 payments a year. So if you look at the present value table of an ordinary annuity with n equals 6 and I equals 7, which I have pulled up here, and you have to make sure you're using the right table because this first table is present value of $1, present value of an ordinary annuity, n equals 6, it's barely highlighted, and the interest rate is 7. You'll see the factor is 4.76654. So then I go back here and I'm going to take my interest payment that's paid every 6 months, multiplied by that factor 4.76554, by 4, and I get $200,000. Okay, that's the first part of my calculation for the selling price. So that was one. The second portion of calculating the price is you have to take the present value of the principal or the face value, which was $700,000. I would go to my present value of a dollar table using n equals 6, I equals 7%. Again, the 7% is half of the market rate because we have payments twice a year. And if you look at that table, the factor is 0.66634. And you take the 700,000 times that factor, it's 466. And you add those two numbers up, the 201.95 plus 466 equals $666,633. That's a lot of sixes and a lot of threes. But this is going to be the selling price of the bond. Okay, so we're going to issue a $700,000 bond, right? I'm going to sell a bond with a $700,000 bond, but it's discounted because I'm only going to get this $666,000 in cash. Just a visual of the present value, just how it looks. Here you have the January 1, and then you have the payments every 6 months on this timeline, and of which you're going to get $42,000 in interest payments every 6 months. And so when you take all those and you present value it, that's how you get your $200,000. The second portion of the selling price is when you take the principal payment, which the issuing company will pay out $700,000 at the end, at the maturity of the bond, and you present value back to today's dollars using a 7% interest rate, or I'm sorry, using 14%, but it's divided by 2. You get 466, so that's how you get your 666,000. So let's just look at the journal entries of how to record this. Masterware is the issuer. The cash is going to be the cash that they received, which is the $666,000. We're going to record a bonds payable liability for the face amount, which is the $700,000. And the difference is going to be this new account. It's going to be called discounts on bonds payable. And it's the difference between the cash price and the face value, which is this $33,367. This discount on bonds payable is a contra liability account. It's a contra liability to the bonds payable amount, and the way it's presented on the balance sheet, there's different ways you can present it, but you could show the face value of $700,000 less the discount, so the carrying value of the bond in the initial issuance of the bond would be the $666,000. United is the investor, the bondholder. They're going to debit investment in bonds, which is going to be for the face amount. This is the amount that they're going to get back at the end of the 3 years. They gave out cash for the $666,000, and they have a contra investment account called discount on investment in bonds. Right? And so when they present their investment on the balance sheet, they're going to net these two accounts to show the investment being $666,000.